what we're trying to do is to, in community, learn and teach each other about preserving human dignity. And so it's necessary, right, to shine a light on not only my injuries, but yours also, right? Yours as a white person, as a white man, and anybody who joins this space, so that we begin to see each other beyond race. And that doesn't mean that we forget our differences, because I feel those differences should be celebrated. There's a wonderful, wonderful things about all cultures, and interestingly enough, we have more in common than we don't. This is one of those moments in history where, because we watched a man die on, whether you watch it on YouTube or whatever news outlet, that all of a sudden there is this sort of agreement to some extent that something again needs to be done. There was a time where, maybe after the 90s and after the Rodney King and all of that, where things sort of slowed down for some people. You know, and you've said it to me, there's something about watching a man cry out for his mother on national television or YouTube or wherever you watched it, that tugged at people differently than some of the other things that we have seen. We are so desensitized to numbers, right? So when we talk about the numbers of people dying, the number of people, health inequities, poverty, and the concentrations of those things in specific racial and cultural groups, those numbers begin to sort of, it takes you sort of a step away from the humanity of it, right? You don't know the individual story. And so this space allows for that to happen. It allows for you as the individual, whatever your race or cultural is, to learn from somebody else's experiences, so the numbers actually become people. This is a difficult conversation, and it's even more so to put it into practice, because we are working towards something that we haven't imagined yet, right? We can't see it.
We're going to talk about a little bit about how we got here with Healing Racism and how it came to Western Massachusetts. And you know, in life, you never know what ripple's gonna, where it's going to go and it's going to intersect with. So back in the early 90s, when I was starting my business, I got to know Nathan Rutstein, who was previously an NBC news producer, and he helped me understand film and video production. And so he became a colleague of mine. And along the way, he became a mentor also. And I noticed that he had a very strong sense of social justice. And so if you're a white guy, it's sometimes hard to talk to another white guy about issues about race, bigotry, and social justice. And I found that he had written a book called To Be One about racism. And he tells a story in the book about how he's in Manhattan and he's driving and a black person cuts him off. And the words in his head are move, N-word. And he says, how could this have happened, right? I'm a progressive person. I believe in social justice. So it began what ended up being the rest of his life, a lifelong journey to figure out what racism was, how had it infected him. And he came across this idea after consulting with psychiatrists, social scientists, and others involved in the work, the idea of this being a disease. So after 2B1, people around the country got interested in, he was one of the first white guys actually to write a book about racism. There's a lot of folks out there now. And so I know you interacted with him, and I'll ask you in a minute how that happened. But he was producing a sequel, Healing Racism in America, Prescription for the Disease. And he needed a publisher because his publisher wasn't ready for this next title. So myself and Nathan and a couple other folks produced the book here in Western Massachusetts in 1993. And this is the book, Healing Racism in America. He follows in this Houston model that had developed an Institute for the Healing of Racism. And they're littered throughout the book, how they did it, the premise of how you pull one of these together. You've talked about today safety, in the sessions. And we ended up selling about 20,000 books in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And a white supermarket chain owner by the name of Bob Woodruck found the work, was at a conference and heard him speak, and realized management was white, people in the front lines were black, and the interaction between the customer and management, there's something left to be desired. So he started this journey and started an Institute for the Healing of Racism in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I'll wrap this up quick. We tried the same thing in 1993, 94, 95 here in Western Massachusetts, and we failed miserably. We didn't have the support. People weren't ready, though I thought in 1993 we'd be ready to have this conversation. And I joined a group called City to City, which was a leadership learning community established in Western Massachusetts in Greater Springfield by the Boston Federal Reserve. And I recall one of the peer cities we were going to visit was Grand Rapids, Michigan, where all these books were. I remember going out and asking them, are you guys still doing that? And they had been doing it for 20 years. 2,000 people had been involved in the Institute, and it had been embedded in the Chamber of Commerce. So I remember holding this book up during our trip to Grand Rapids, and John Davis of the Davis Foundation and others, Vanessa Otero and other people who were on the trip, said, we're in, can we do something in Western Massachusetts? So part of that discovery to bring it back here was to discover you. And so you had also seen Nathan Rutstein in action.
I did.
So here we are from the mid-90s to now, sitting here at this table talking about this. So how did you find this work, and what appealed to you about getting involved? Because that's not easy.
I didn't find the work found me. This was a work that I had, I dare say, came upon me because I had seen so much of what was going on in my lifetime. And I was taught by my mother in my home that people are people. And as I traveled around and got a chance to know people as I'm growing up, I was able to learn from my experiences. And there were times when I saw things that just wasn't right, where it had to do with race. And I put that in quotes because, as we talk about in the Healing Racism, that there's only truly one race, and that being the human race. So inasmuch as I had seen it, and I had gotten involved and I took steps to learn more, why is it that some of us believe as we do? Why is it that some of us conduct ourselves as we do? It put me in a position where I wanted to learn more. I wanted to hear more. It was a fight that I had to get in. And in the words of the late, great Dr. Vernon Johns, if you see a good fight, get in it. So I got in it.
So when you hear healing racism, what does that mean to you?
When I hear healing racism, I reflect upon what we talk about the most, and that is the changing from the inside out, not the outside in. We're able to learn about ourselves. We're able to learn about others. We are able to be a part of a safe environment. It has to be safe. We are able to communicate in a safe environment where it's non-confrontational.
Speaking as a white person, and I remember when John Davis, when we went out to Grand Rapids, said to me, why'd you never tell me about this? I've known you for a long time, you're a friend, I do work with the foundation. And I said to him, how does one white guy tell another white guy, we have an issue around race and we have to do something about it? Because not the official position of the Institute, but my position is that we're going to change this. If we're going to truly build anti-racist communities,
Sure.
it's going to require white people to have a big role in that. So my question to you would be, a lot of white people don't feel that they're going to be safe. They feel they're going to be, in a sense, attacked in a program where the onus is going to be on white folks. How do you respond to that?
within the first 10 minutes, Paul, we emphasize safety. People are able to process when they feel safe. They're able to listen differently when they feel safe. They're able to communicate differently when they feel safe. Of the now more than 31,000 participants that I've sat in front of, that's quite a number. 100% of the sessions that I've facilitated, I've had at least one that has shared that this process is different because I felt safe. I came here with reservations because this is an emotionally toxic subject. This isn't a subject that you talk about in polite company. It makes people from all walks of life, from different shades, different hues. It generates discomfort, different feelings of pain, anger. And when we talk about and emphasize the need to maintain a safe environment, there are those that came, and I've even had some people that showed up that said, I really didn't want to come because I was fearful as a white person that I'm going to be attacked, that I'm going to be blamed for everything, and I didn't do anything. But this process was different because I felt safe here.
So I remember you were on that trip in Grand Rapids.
Yep, city to city.
City to city. And this panel was about race and racism. And I was just getting to know you at the time. And you stepped forward and talked to John. Why did you do that?
So the context is that at that point during our trip, I was ready to go home. I was excited to go because I wanted to learn. I was meeting people like you, people like John Davis. And then when we got there, a lot of the solutions or the ideas, strategies for addressing our economic health here in Springfield in particular, but the surrounding towns, and also the high concentration of poverty sounded a lot like gentrification. And so I was a bit disheartened at that point. And then in that moment, John stood up and said that he wanted to bring this to Springfield. And I didn't know John very well, but I knew John didn't have to do that. He could go his entire life and not take any action towards addressing racism. And so it moved me that it moved him. And later, before dinner, I said, my name is Vanessa Otero. I'd like to join you. And I didn't think he was going to call. We didn't know each other. And then he did, or somebody did. And that was 2011, and we've been working at this ever since.
One of the things that we talk about in the Healing of Racism sessions has to do with the history. And the history is a very important part of the healing racism process to help people to understand our past as well as our present. But it's very important to understand how we arrived at where we are. When we began to talk about the history, it's important that, to understand, as we emphasize to our participants, that while there's a lot that we understand and that we as participants are aware of, this is a very interactive part. So we encourage the participants to chime in, to offer, perhaps to fill in some area that we may not have noted. It's also important to understand that this is a hop, skip, and a jump through history. We talk about the importance of the resist and the racism as we reflect upon it. We talk about it because, as was the case then, continues to be the case where we had people that resisted racism, that argued and defended the issues to fight against racism. As we reflect upon it, I want to talk about the color prejudice and slavery, as when we talk about slavery, we talk about history, it is often believed that the slaves were of a certain color, but in fact, in our history, slavery was not always related to color. In fact, somewhere around the time of 2000 BCE, the Egyptians in the Mediterranean world held that there were no color prejudices. While it was slavery, but it was not a color prejudice. As we move forward, it's also understood that while the importance of the role that Aristotle played, Aristotle was a Greek philosopher that yielded tremendous influence. We listened to him. We talk about the influence that Aristotle had. We looked at to understand that he had actually brought forth the concept of superior and inferior human beings. He had gone on to note that slaves are devoid of souls. Why is this so important? Some may ask. Because as long as there are the inferior and superior races, if you will, and we talk about races in quotes because we know throughout, and we teach throughout the Healing Racism Institute, that we are all of one race. However, again, as Aristotle had put forth inferior and superior beings, this was an effort to categorize different groups of people. Again, slaves are devoid of souls. As we move forward, it would be very well understood that now we're looking at a color that would be directly attached to slavery. As long as they came under the category of slaves and devoid of souls, they were not human, which meant that it was okay, would illustrate that it was okay to dehumanize them and to treat them accordingly, which, as we will find throughout our history, why those that were enslaved were able to be treated that way, because there was not a human connection, if you will. As we also reflect on history, I'd like to just touch briefly upon what was taking place around the time of 989 ACE, after the Common Era. It's often believed that that African people, the darker-hued people, our relatives, our family, that they were savage, that they were incapable of learning. But in fact, around that time, 989 ACE, we'd come to find that one of the oldest universities in existence was founded in Sankore, Mali, which was Western Africa. This is quite a surprise to a number of people because, again, it was believed by modern day thinking that when there's the reflection on universities, we're talking about being established by our lighter hued brethren, white people, when in fact it dates way back to this period in Western Africa. As we move forward, again, talking about history, I'd like to just speak briefly with you about what was going on around the time of 1000 ACE. Oxford Dictionary actually defined black as defiled, dirty, without merit, while at the same time defining white as pure, etc. Some may ask, what is the big issue here? It's a very significant issue because, in fact, there was the conditioning, the mental conditioning, the social conditioning that when we're able to make any reference to black or white, generally when we mention black, there is a negative connotation that goes with that explanation, while at the same time we talk about white when we're making a reference to the white lie, if you will. The white lie is not a bad lie. It's not so bad. And when we're talking about white collar crime, there is this attempt to condition or to have the mindset that, well, it isn't so bad when it's white associated. On the other hand, when there's a mention of black, when you're talking about even a black people, again, there's a mindset through social conditioning that has us to believe that there's something not quite right about it. And it does, in fact, impact how we see others, how we are inclined to interact with others moving forward. In the Healing Racism Institute, we talk about the 5 shifts that we've established. The 5 shifts, as we have encountered with many participants, they're the questions of how about getting to it and telling us what is it we need to do? Let's just get to it. The 5 shifts were established in an effort to help individuals to understand that this is a transformational process. This is a process where we're able to in fact, learn more about ourselves, other individuals, our communities. In doing so, we put these 5 shifts in place so that we're able to recognize that while we may have some challenges, we may have viewed things from a particular perspective, that we need to try coming from a very different place. I'll just share with you very briefly about Dr. Albert Einstein, who many of us have heard of. Albert Einstein, who was a genius in so many areas. We spent a lot of time talking about a lot of his successes without factoring in that he did in fact have some bumps in the road and hit the brick wall a few times. In doing so, he made a statement that we often refer to in the Healing Racism, and that is that problems cannot be solved at the same level of awareness for which they were discovered. Hence, we need a new place to come from. We reflect upon that because there was the genius of Albert Einstein that had to learn that there are other places by which to come. We have to start from a different place. The 5 shifts allow for that. While there are 5 shifts, I'm going to spend just a few moments talking to you about one in particular. That shift being certainty to curiosity. We talk about healing racism, so I'm going to put the term about certainty to curiosity this way. Curiosity is in fact the cure to certainty. And when we speak about that, it's important to understand that when we find ourselves being certain, which our society places a premium on, this shift is the pathway to understanding. When we talk about the certainty to curiosity shift, it's very important to understand that if, in fact, we are certain about knowing many things, we have already failed. We like to look at curiosity as being the cure to certainty. Why? Because certainty is going to allow us to move forward without judgment. It allows us to seek the data, if you will, to get a better understanding before making decisions, even in our private life. When we learn how to be curious and not so certain, it opens doors for better communication. It allows us to listen and understand from a perspective that perhaps we would not have otherwise. When we speak about making the shifts, this is something that we encourage because we like to be able to focus on, again, seeing things from a very different perspective. When we're speaking about being curious, it takes us to a point of being able to learn, to allow us to listen, to wonder, as opposed to know. When we're talking about the shifts of certainty to curiosity, it allows us to be in a place where I'm able to listen to your perspective and not so much to be fixated on mine. We, throughout this process, encourage people to, again, look for opportunities to see things from a very different perspective. Certainty interfered with my opportunity to learn from my colleague. Throughout this process, we allow people to share, to reflect. And as I reflected on that experience, I can recall talking to this colleague, and we actually had found ourselves entangled in a very heated discussion where I am not proud to share this story, but I will share it in as much as transparency is so important throughout the Healing Racism Institute. At this time when, just to give you an example of my own experience, I can recall being entangled in this very intense discussion with this individual. And I was very certain of why this individual was wrong, because as far as I was concerned, I knew how folks that looked like him voted. I was pretty certain as to why he was thinking the way that he was. There was no curiosity anywhere on the table. There was no curiosity anywhere in the room, just certain as to why this individual was wrong, and I was certain of why I was right. When we talk about making a shift, we're talking about coming from a different place. As I said, I wasn't proud. I'm not proud to share the story, but I want to be honest with you. In reflecting on it, I have since learned to come from a different place and being curious as to why people may have the positions that they may have, what may be the contributing factors. It has more to do with being curious about them and not being so certain as to why I may take the position that I have. When we talk about certainty, it can come off as a bit arrogant, dismissive, distant. When we practice that shift and being more curious, it actually allows us to connect rather than to continue to be separate. Okay, you folks had an opportunity to reflect on that question. Who would like to share of an experience that you had where you made a shift and things had gotten better? Or a time when you did not make a shift and things were worse? Yes, sir.
I'll share.
Please do.
I'm reflecting on a time where I was put in a position professionally to and responsibility of facilitating conversations amongst law enforcement personnel, community members, and program providers. One of the things I started noticing was that there was a lot of assumptions being made from the folks that were in the room. Even though we were having weekly meetings that we were discussing community issues, there were still, I felt, a disconnect that we were having as far as how we were all understanding where each person was coming from. And especially when it comes to conversations between law enforcement and community, we really have to be very mindful. The shifts there apply perfectly. What I noticed was that there was a need to ensure that we were having those personal conversations, to ensure that folks were really clear about what it is they wanted to say, and us to understand where the other person was coming from. But I remember vividly one time we had after a meeting, we had like a quick 10-minute conversation between one specific law enforcement officer and two community members. That conversation really impacted all of us, because what it did was it created this level of humanity, right? Because we started sharing from our own personal experiences about a specific incident that happened in the community. And so when we started sharing sort of what we saw, what we experienced, all of us just started looking at each other practically in tears, saying, "Oh my goodness!" Like, you know, it's this realization, right? That you know, there are humans on every single side of it. I will say this: that shift, right? Because we were all certain up to that point that this person was being this way because of that, I was being this way because of what happened to me. That conversation really did allow us to sort of soften our stance on how we were approaching the work. And I remember vividly and how quickly everything started shifting for the good after that conversation. Because after that, we started having conversations about community from a place of the heart set, the place of, I'm here, I want to help, everyone who lives there, we want to see it better. So people build trust because of that one conversation, that shift. Between the certainty that we were all feeling and just allowing ourselves to be curious, right, about where everyone else was, and the impact was significant.
Wow. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
Others who would like to share?
I can share that I have many moments of having to move from certainty to curiosity. And the best thing that I can do is describe the process by which this happens. I have to catch myself. I have to check what I think I know based on what's in front of me, the stereotypes, everything that I've been conditioned to think and believe. And suspending that is, it's hard because, again, we are conditioned, to be right and to know. And then it's also humbling. It's humbling, and the growth is that very moment, whether it's in a conversation with one person or a conversation with many person, that point in time where I allow myself to learn. and I allow myself to say, I don't know. And what I thought I knew was based on something that doesn't apply to this human being, but is a generalization that I hold near, because as human beings, we go into spaces trying to figure out what's in front of us, right? And so we have certain sets of things that we know. I know where I am now, and I know the kinds of things that happen here. And so it is actually going against your every instinct. It's humbling, but one of the best phrases, and I learned this from a former governor who I heard once say, I don't know, but I'll get back to you.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
So I guess for me, a shift going from certainty to curiosity has happened over the last year or two as, post Floyd, and folks are talking about terms like white privilege. And I was certain that I had never benefited from white privilege. I was certain that it was only white people who benefited from white privilege. But when I became curious about, have I ever benefited from white privilege being half white, growing up the way I have in a nicer neighborhood, going to private school, private high school, going to a college where there's very few minorities, being accepted in white spaces that some black people wouldn't be because of being half Irish or because of my name or because of how I grew up. So being curious about how I've benefited from white privilege that was a shift for me. And now it's allowed me to be curious about other things, about male privilege, about being straight, about being able-bodied. So all these different privileges that I have based off of that curiosity of white privilege and benefiting from it in certain ways.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing.
Yes, I'd like to share. As Tony was talking, I was thinking primarily of all the times that I was uncertain. And I had to really kind of delve deeply to come up with a time where I went from certainty to curiosity. And I remember times throughout my amazing career with the public school system, there were just lots of times when I had to say, okay, Willette, you're going to make the change. You're going to move into this situation with different thinking. And so I remember when there were some changes in assignments, and I was placed to work with a group of women, none of whom look like me, none of whom have had the experiences that I've had. And I went in thinking, oh boy, here we go. I'm going to have to explain my hair. I'm going to have to hear about when they went tanning and now they're the same color as me. I'm going to have to. So all these things were going through my mind that I had heard for years and experienced for years. And I'm saying, okay, you're going to have to deal with it because this is your work assignment. And so we began working, and certainly first day together, I heard the things that I thought I was going to hear, and I concluded that this is just going to be a very difficult assignment. But as time went on, I began thinking, these women are competent. These women seem to care about the same children that I care about. These women seem like they are determined to be successful. So I made the shift. And instead of coming angry or, donned in full armor, I decided, I'm just going to chill. And because I was able to make the shift from certainty of how things were going to be, I got to know them as people. I got to hear their hopes, dreams, and desires that were very similar to mine. And we developed a working relationship that bordered on friendship. And so I was very grateful that I stepped up, per se, and I was able to see the situation differently than I had anticipated it being. And it turned out that we, as I said, we developed strong working relationships. So that was an experience that I will not forget.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing, Ms. Willette.
One of the components of the Healing Racism program is that we show, thanks to Tony Cox, artifacts where people can actually see and touch, feel for themselves what represents racism, race prejudice, and hatred and bigotry in our country. When we're trying to learn about this, the fact that we can see, touch things, that I think also touch people's hearts. So you've been collecting things for a while, and so tell us how you came about what you're going to show us now, and what does it represent to you?
One of the sets that really leaped out at me, Paul, was the chains, the shackles. These are actual slave shackles that were used, and if you were to look up closely, you'd see that this isn't mass produced. This was made by the blacksmiths. You can see that it was even the hammering marks. And these shackles, as we've had a number of representatives, or I beg your pardon, a number of participants that would come and see it. To see these things in a book, to look at it on television, it's one thing. But to actually have the actual slave shackles right in front of you, to touch, to have the sense of what it was like for them to actually wear these. There are a lot of people that have quite a reaction to it. Some very, very disturbing, very disturbed, very uncomfortable. We've even had participants to break out into tears because it's real now. What it means to me, what I had chosen to bring these out for was this. There were those that were physically chained, but what a number of people don't realize is that while that individual or that particular group did not have to worry about chains, they are in fact chained mentally, emotionally, psychologically. The chains affect everybody. We're all shackled in some sense, unless we're able to rid our minds and free our minds, which is something that we talk about through the Healing Racism process. I also brought the slave alarm, and the slave alarm was used attached to a slave that was likely to run away. And the whole idea was to alert the dogs so that they are able to track down these slaves. The amazing thing was that this was designed to alert those that were to hunt down the slaves. But those that are actually hunting and enslaving, what alarms that may exist to alert them to the point that it's time to wake up, that it's time for everyone to wake up and realize that we're all affected by racism. And those are the things that we talk about in the Healing Racism process. We create a safe environment so that we can actually discuss that and be able to free our minds.
It's necessary, right, to shine a light on not only my injuries, but yours also, right? Yours as a white person, as a white man, and anybody who joins this space, so that we begin to see each other beyond race.
I remember Nathan Rutstein always would say we're at least 50th cousins. The science proves that. And it seems like a very simple idea, but when he told me that and I read that, so I just started driving around thinking everybody was a cousin. It just changed your lens. So I remember he was not a great facilitator, and the curriculum that was developed, which actually was developed by a woman by the name of Rita Starr in St. Louis and then built on over the years. Who's an amazing person. She's now in Chicago. This concept of the oneness of humanity and our common humanity, it comes through in the second part of our program. So I was with him, and he was in Louisville, Kentucky, and he was doing a session for the Vice Squad of the Louisville Police Department. And I remember him as kind of a one-man show, doing the program, not to the sophistication that we have now. And he brought up this idea of cousinhood. And I remember at a coffee break and during the session, black officer, white officer looked at each other and simultaneously said, "Hello, cousin." So it is as simple as that. So the last question I have for you, and then I'll just read one closing passage from the book, which I think sums it up. And by the way, there's a good resource out there. The Human Family Tree by the National Geographic is probably an hour and a half documentary. It takes swabs of DNA from 200 New Yorkers, and is a fascinating journey into the fact that we are all connected, and that the variances between on skin is less than variances for eye color.
Yes.
That's like a bigger eye. So these are facts, right? So we always talk about race being a social construct, which it was. And you've talked about Aristotle and those things where things started to change, black, and what that definition is. So the final question I would have for you, given this idea about our common humanity, given the fact that science now backs it up, this is a very ambitious goal we have to build racism-free communities. Are you hopeful, both, and why?
I am. I'm hopeful because, we're built to survive. There's a program on Prime, Amazon Prime. It's a master class, and it's got some pretty prolific Black scholars and writers on it, and they talk about Black love. And Black love is not just for Black people, right? Black love is this powerful source of strength that has pushed Black people around the world towards success in spite of. And so Black love is this powerful force, and we all can have it, because as human beings, it is something that propels us towards good. And so I think of that often. Are there moments where I say, I can't have another conversation about this? Absolutely. But I think about my nieces and nephews, and I think about the children that I interact with in my life, and how those forces for good, Black love included, will push us through.
I'm very hopeful, Paul. I have to experience ugliness every day of my life, but I'm also able to witness and be a part of some of the beauties of life, and that being from my own experience, as well as listening to the experience of others that are able to learn that we do have a connectedness. They're able to learn that they too play a part in contributing to this society, so that we are able to put a lot of that beneath us. I'm not going to be intimidated by racism. I experience it, and it doesn't feel good. It's ugly. It's very unattractive, and it rears its ugly head in a variety of ways, which we don't have enough time this year for me to tell you all of the ways. But it does. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because I have the opportunity to talk to people that come to me on day one of our process and have tremendous reservations from life's experiences. These are people of different hues that will come and say that I didn't want to be here, I don't want to talk about this, I'm sick of it, I'm angry. And at the end of 2 days, they're asking, how do I become a facilitator? How can I be a part of this? This was powerful. I've been to a lot of diversity trainings. This is not that. I've been through a number of processes. This was not that. I maintain hope. The darker it may seem that the world gets as it relates to racism, there's still that glimmer of hope. But some days, that glimmer turns into a bright light for me, because I'm able to see how so many lives are impacted. When I can have someone to come before me, a white male, a privileged white male, on so many levels, that will share with me the way that I thought when I came is not the way that I'm leaving. It also allows for me to experience that hope when I'm able to talk to that non-white individual that said, I didn't think this could happen, but I'm able to come here after so many years of just being quiet because I didn't think that I could talk about this. But now there's a space where I can talk about it. It's being heard, and people who are in position to do something are asking, what can we do? I have hope. I have lots of reason to hope, and I'm going to maintain that.
So I'll just end with this quote from the book. I knew him, he was a mentor. He's a sweet human being. He worked very hard and diligently on this. He passed away several years ago, but I found this one passage from his book that kind of encompasses what he was all about. He says, "What is necessary for people everywhere to recognize, once and for all, the truth, that we are all members of the same family, that our family must be united if we are to have peace in the world, and that learning to love one another, which is an essential step towards unity, is our greatest challenge." So thank you all for being a part of it.
Thank you.
We invite folks out there, organizations, to take this journey with us.